possess a lot of discussion on corporate governance. My main concern is the level of regulatory intervention that might mandatorily prescribe some of these issues. And that we're seeing in the United States, and I do worry a little bit about whether that's going to have unforeseen consequences in the way it could be applied. As I mentioned just now, board committees are an important part of governance. I think, and I don't hear enough about the discussions around board committees and their effective use in a governance structure. But what's going to be more important, and certainly in the thoughtful companies, is the need for these committees to actually have their own budget, so they can hire independent experts to advise them on complex issues that are presented to them, particularly in the banking and financial sector. Risk management is an area that's clearly been identified as a major failing in many of the instances of the financial crisis that we're observing. And I think there we need to also understand a lot more what are the risks that face the business. It's not just financial risks. There's a lot of operational risks. There's a lot of risks that are external to the business. In other words, how many companies here that are suffering, for example, because of events that are taking elsewhere, and how prepared were they for that? One of the issues is mainstreaming risk management in the business. It's not something that is done on a sort of routine basis by a department, an administrative department. Risk management should be part of the day-to-day thinking of any manager, any operator in the company, not just the board, not just the audit department or any function like that. It should be very much part of the business. You have to look at a business like Banco Santander in Spain. Their risk committee meets, I believe, every week. Not always physically, but by telephone. But every week, the risk committee meets to discuss the risks currently facing Banco Santander. And what I'm trying to say is that has been clearly a thoughtful process, because most people probably raise their eyebrows and think a meeting every week is crazy. Clearly they feel it's necessary, and certainly it's one of the banks that so far appears to be navigating the crisis reasonably successfully. This really brings to attention a lot of structural and operational issues that I don't have time to discuss, but one of the key issues, you have an internal audit function, and distinctively you should also have a risk management function. Risk management should be very much part of what management does and assumes, and should be measured on over and above their overall performance in the divisions that they run, alongside the internal audit department. And then, of course, the important issue is retaining some measure of independence in their ability to be able to supervise and assist the company in performing better, particularly in terms of areas of oversight and monitoring. I think the other area, when talking about risk, and this is not just a matter for banks, it's a matter for any company, is that there should be much more effort spent on risk identification. And in other words, identifying what risks will really change the way we do business and the way we make decisions, not just simply measuring the known risks that you already are faced with. Because it seems in the current crisis, a lot of the effort was spent on measuring risk, of which there are lots of very sophisticated tools and instruments to utilize, but not enough time was spent on really truly understanding the risks that can affect the business. I mean, one of the studies recently revealed that European banks had an obsession with the possibility of terrorist strikes on their operations. But there was very little mention of how the failure of the housing market might define the risk to the banks and the ultimate problems that may raise. The other issue, coming to the conclusion, is the question of building strong value systems, founded on clear ethical guidelines and practices. This covers issues like conflicts of interest, issues around share dealings, issues around procurement. If those standards very often define the quality of the decision-making of the board and management, and the business judgment which the board exercises by setting very clear, consistent and tangible standards, certainly at an ethical level, around how the business should be operated, what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And it's not just an issue for the board and management, but making sure every employee understands that, and particularly that the board and management live by that and demonstrate that in their day-to-day operations. What I really try to focus on in this time is really trying to give a short synopsis, one, of the crisis, how that is affecting economies, how that's defining current developments in corporate governance, and how some of that might be applicable here in Bulgaria, and certainly within the work of the Bulgarian Corporate Governance Commission that's being launched here today. As I said before at the outset, what worries me the most is that I often have a sense of déjà vu when I look at this, in the sense that we seem to have seen a lot of these issues before, and it just remains far too simple and obvious when you look back at these problems, and one just wonders how much we're going to learn from this crisis as we plan our way forward. As George Voiter, who's also a member of our private sector advisory group, is the chairman of the Yale School of Management on Corporate Governance, and is a retired and very prominent banker in the United States, once mentioned, is essentially boards must re-establish and enforce the standard that risks are to be undertaken for the benefit of their constituents and not for the personal gain of management. Thank you very much.